My name is Dr. Ben Zweibelson. I am a design facilitator and theorist. I work for the military right now with the Special Operations Command as a contractor for a university. It's called the Joint Special Operations University, and I also do academic work through my university, Lancaster University, and I'm a retired U.S. Army infantry officer with 22 years, multiple combat tours, Iraq and Afghanistan. But I originally started off oddly as a graphic designer in the kind of the civilian commercial world. A 4-year undergrad with the University of Connecticut, but I ended up going into the military. And that kind of helps segue into how I got into design, I guess. But I'll pause there. So it's a fun metaphor, and I know my good friends Philippe Belly-Boussard and Philippe Dufour, they really like this metaphor. So it'll be interesting to see what other people say. I'm going to say that I'm a little bit more like a volcano. Coming up out of the water, shooting lava around, but the volcanoes are the ones that help create the archipelagos. They help create the land masses that then things kind of flourish on. I like to think that one of my opportunities in my role has been to help foster more landmass, if you will, for more islands through working on theory, from instruction, writing a lot, and then kind of cultivating a network of people from all different walks of design life, if you will. Particularly between the military, security, defense, policy, and then commercial enterprise and academia. So, and I'm also sometimes considered a little difficult to work with sometimes, so maybe that's the hotness of the lava. So if you are interested in design, I think the first thing that I normally ask people is, well, what do you mean? What do you feel design means from your perspective? And for a lot of folks, that can tell you a lot about not only where they're going or where they want to go, but also what their background is thus far, assuming that they must have heard of something about this. Maybe they learned about it in a book or a college course, or they encountered it on a web or a TED Talk, and that really kind of helps clarify for me. Okay, and actually, I have a graphic that I can share with you that, if in editing, they can put it up here. But it kind of lays out that when we talk about design, the word becomes very confusing because people mean different things. Because the words have metaphoric devices that underpin them with everything that we say. Archipelago, for example, and volcanoes. But beyond that, there are models that are being constructed that we use for us to help use methodologies. We have to have a model before that, and that model is based upon theories. And so when we talk about design, or if we talk about anything, but in this case, we're talking about design, different types of design are drawing from different theories, and then those designers that have created these models, that's where these methodologies kind of shoot out from, and that's where you get this design practice. Actually, in theory, with real-world applications, design praxis is a great term. And when I encounter different designers that are out there, it always has to turn into a conversation slowly of figuring out what are the underlying theories that inform your model that then generates you to believe this is the method that works for me for the design I'm trying to achieve, which then links to the language and the words that they use and the techniques and the heuristic. All this kind of links back together to this giant kind of framework. But a lot of times we're not aware of it. And so that's one of my jobs, I think, as a design theorist with others around the world, is we really get into making sense of this so that when someone who's new, who's coming in saying, well, I want to learn about design, and they start throwing at you a couple of words that correlate over to a human-centered design approach. Now I see where the theory's coming from that helps inform the model, and you encountered this method. And this is the context and reality that you want to do design for. Okay. But if you encounter someone else who says something And that those metaphors, they link back to systemic operational design in the Israeli Defense Force. Oh, okay. Now we know this other framework with these methods linked to models that are nested in different theories. And those are different than what's going on, say, in enterprise design thinking or Agile or Scrum. And so this ultimately will help when you have a convention or a group of people or a whole bunch of folks commenting on a LinkedIn post, and you have an Agile designer commenting on a Scrum designer who's arguing with a military designer who's trying to explain to an enterprise design thinker from IBM what policymakers in Washington are doing when they're looking at the Israeli design method. And you can see all of that in a chain, and it becomes almost a Tower of Babel. So this goes back into, can we work out the framework of what all these different designers are attempting to do? So going back to what I was kind of saying before, and if that graphic gets thrown up once more as I talk a little bit about this, models link to the methods, and then we use those methods to interact with reality. And reality then causes reactions. So some will say, well, the data comes out of it. And data is an okay term, but the system is reacting with you as you're doing your method, and your method's informed by a model. The model that you've constructed is a cognitive framework that draws from different theories that inform you, well, this is how we ought to do it. This is normatively how we ought to do this design to achieve what we want. But why are we trying to do design? And that becomes kind of the elevator pitch for me. My area of focus is on security affairs. So I'm looking at warfare. We're looking at peacekeeping. We're looking at security, defense, policymakers, nation states, non-state actors, global competition. So within all these things, what you won't hear me saying is I'm not talking about new user products or not new products or new user experiences. That area is also a very important type of design, but that's going to be geared towards commercial or commerce. And that's a whole other area that kind of is different than the area where I'm working on. And the area that I'm looking at, designers are trying to act upon a complex system today, and through design achieve or gain some sort of advantage. And the advantage is going to be emergent. It's going to probably be nonlinear. It's going to probably require some new language, some new constructs, some new methods, because what we have today is already insufficient, which is why that strategic leader, that policymaker, or that institutional leader is asking for the design from the security organization. They'll probably have lots of good technology and good products and good tools and good people that have had great training. But whatever they're being told to do right now in a security context, it is not working. And that's really where the demand comes for design in our area of practice. And so design then once again becomes, how do we get the organization to a position of recognized but almost unimagined advantage tomorrow that's at the expense of the adversaries and at the benefit of the stakeholders? So I already touched on that a little bit. So once again, going back to the graphic I would put up, showing that different types of design have different language that are tied to different metaphoric devices, which is great. But those are underpinning different methodologies, whether you're doing the Stanford D-School hexagonal, the IDEO made very, very popular, with Empathize, Ideate, and so on and so forth, the hexagonal models going forward. Or if you're doing, say, enterprise design thinking, which was doing a modified hexagonal until a few years ago, and then they switched it to a nice infinity loop with hills and valleys and sponsor engagements. Which that one there, that's an example of that's a different method, but the model for enterprise design thinking through IBM, that's drawing from two different frameworks and theories. One which is Agile for software, and then the second is the base human-centered design constructs that came out of the 1960s and 70s and 80s, Horst Riddle, Archer, Simon, Papinek, and others. So I'm kind of getting outside of I'm going down a rabbit hole, so let me pull back to my design. So security design is going to use a combination of looking at understanding our frame using social paradigm theory. That's one of my favorite disciplines, pulling from the theory, right? So that's one of the theories that informs. Complexity theory, systems theory, as well as some elements of postmodern theory. And that's a very spicy one to put out there, because when you say postmodern, sometimes people get their academic torches and pitchforks out. But the type of postmodern constructs that we like to bring into military design, Dr. Shimon Nave of the Israeli Defense Forces, he was the first military designer in the 1990s. He intentionally did this, pulling from postmodern theory, also pulling from complexity theory, chaos theory, and drawing from Soviet operational shock that he was doing research on all the way back through World War I. So that's that other element that's missing in most of the design practices that are looking at commerces. They're not really akin or used to a military decision-making methodology, because the militaries are infamous for speaking our own language and having this very intricate, doctrine-based, systematic, linear process. And this is how decisions are made, from the strategic all the way down to what they call the tactical level. And this is considered planning. And so then militaries have been trying to squish design into a step somewhere, usually at the beginning in what they call mission analysis. Try to force design in there so that it can work with all that planning process, which conflicts with what design tries to do, because design is using different theories, making different cognitive models, and trying to attempt different methodologies. And so that's some of the challenges that there are with any type of military design. My military design, personally, I like to draw from a couple of key sources, one being the Israeli Defense Force Systemic Operational Design, the work of Shimon Nave, but also drawing from Christopher Paparone and his work with sociology and applying that to a military setting. And he's not the only sociologist, but he is one of the few that wrote a book on it. And so Dr. Paparone has a great deal of social paradigm theory that works into how you can do design. He draws from Donald Schoen, Carl Weick, Adamo Stukos, Mary Jo Hatch, and many others. And then lastly, I studied postmodern philosophy extensively because of the breadcrumbs that Nave dropped, and I wanted to really learn more about this really bizarre area and how this could actually help influence the military in a unique way, even though when you talk with postmodernists, they're usually in shock and horror that the military system is trying to assimilate some of these concepts. Whereas within the military, if you mention postmodernism too quickly, you could shut down that group who feel that that's also some kind of intellectual boogeyman. So that's kind of where I am, I guess, if that makes sense. There are a couple of good examples, case studies that are out and available, and one of the challenges is that military activities that ask for design are automatically going to be really, really tough challenges. And so as soon as they become really difficult, they're high risk, and then we often tend to classify them, which means that a lot of design work that's being done and has been done in the past 15, 20 years ends up getting trapped behind classification. There are some exceptions. Very recently, the 75th Ranger Regiment co-wrote with myself, actually, a case study on Project Galahad, which is the name of their design cell, and how they implemented design education, design practice within the Ranger Regiment. And that's available online at Taylor and Francis. It's actually open. There's no paywall blocking you. So if you just Google Project Galahad Rangers Taylor and Francis, it should come right up. There are some other examples that are out there that I've written on extensively from Afghanistan. Colonel Grant Martin from the U.S. Special Operations Command has also written a lot about design that he's done in the field. And then also other international experts from Canada, Dr. Paul Mitchell from the Canadian Forces College, Dr. Ofer Graysher out of Israel, Dr. Aaron Jackson out of the Australian Army. The list goes on and on. And the Archipelago website, of course, has a lot of that material. For me personally, I was asked in Afghanistan in 2012, and I'm there as a brand new young major, just came out of the School of Advanced Military Studies, and I'm working in what's called a CAG, a Commander's Action Group at a general officer level. It's a small little quasi think tank, and we do all the really tough academic work for the general officer. And we got this email, and we called it the 15 questions. and it came from Washington, D.C., from policymakers directly to our organization. And it was a gobbledygook of different types of questions. One question might say, tell us how many females have graduated the police academy in the past year. Next question might say, what is the expected Afghan army deployment capacity for the next quarter? Tell us how many boots have been used or how much ammunition has been fired. The different types of kind of relatively easy to answer questions. And then in the middle of there was this one question just sitting there, a little bit thicker than the others. And it said, can you tell us what the future Afghan security environment will be in 5 years? And with that information, can you also recommend to us a glide path on how to change or reduce the entire Afghan security force package to include training, equipping, and combat operations and security operations over the next 5 years? And when they read this, everyone in the room kind of all the blood rushed out of their face. Like, this is impossible to answer. And I remember the CAC chief kind of just waving around, and I said, I'll do it. And he said, well, how are you going to do it? And I said, I'm going to apply this design theory to it because I think this would be perfect. And so I dove headfirst into my very first real-world design application right out of school after learning from Nave and Alice Butler Smith and some of the great design educators. Here I am, and I get to do whatever I want because nobody really knows how to answer that question, and they just wanted me to go away and do something. So then fast forward, I had a couple of weeks. I was able to work on whiteboards using different techniques and methods, drawing from doctrine and planning, but also from all these different design constructs. I was able to smuggle in swarm theory, and I had course of action development where they were imitating scout bees that were finding new locations, but I could never tell them that because if I told the NATO officers that they were doing bee swarm theory for their wargaming, I would have been fired. So some of it is a little bit of obfuscating or deceptive, but that's just to get them to do the different processes. So ultimately, I was able to complete it. I wrote about it in Small Wars Journal, which is available. And that product eventually went all the way up to the embassy level and then was disseminated out across the different militaries and the partner organizations. So that was kind of my first experience doing design. It was an incredible adventure, but it was also very, very intense. Right now it's 2021, and the temperature for design, for military design, for design and security affairs, whatever we want to call it, it just keeps going up and up and up. And we're finally at a point now, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to say this because it wasn't happening. But now we're at a point where the momentum is so great that this is really the birth of what may be its own sub-discipline in security studies, that this is becoming something that is challenging how militaries and governments and policymakers and government agencies and different organizations that work with defense, security, law enforcement, public health and services, protection, all these areas, all those things are difficult, wicked, complex, challenging, irregular, irrational, nonlinear, emergent. All those things are happening, right? And in all those organizations for many, many decades, they've all been doing a similar sequential, analytic, optimized, systematic process of decision-making and knowledge curation. And they are breaking down now more than ever. It's not just failures in security environments for various coalition forces. It's failures across all different types of enterprise, whether you're talking about virus response, dealing with migrant populations, dealing with drug issues, suicide, population problems, and so on and so forth. It's everywhere. And this design, the way that we are looking at it for the security, but also in extension, not for new products and not for new user experiences, but for organizations and groups and stakeholders, changing our frame so that we can then develop an opportunity for tomorrow that will require perhaps different methods, different language, different processes, and then even different models that our organizations do. So this is all heavy work, but all of this is really starting to surge worldwide. And so I'm really excited to see what happens in the next 10 years. Some of the challenges with design, once again, where you stand depends on where you sit, as the maxim goes. And so if, for example, you've learned a type of design, so fill in the blank, let's say you've learned Scrum and you're a huge fan of it because Scrum as a subset of Agile, it has its own process, it has its origins in software development. And now, for example, the U.S. Navy is experimenting in some of their areas with trying to take the Scrum methods that are tied to a model that are drawn from theory, and they're trying to insert that into naval requirements and needs that are looking for design. In some of those areas, it's going to work great. It's going to work great. And those areas are probably going to be software areas because, once again, that's what that design methodology was really built for. The areas where it's not going to work well are the same areas where if you took, say, Israeli systemic operational design or Army design methodology or the Marine Corps design methodology, each of those are different, and they're all created by different organizations for different reasons. The United States Army is massive, right? And it needs to tailor down a very relatively simplistic sequence of convergent divergent thinking. Thank you. I just had a brain fart. And this is a very quick way to kind of hotwire the car to get some of those out at any level. The Marine Corps is different as well, working mostly at a tactical level, which is why they've inserted their design methodology there exclusively, and so on and so forth. There's all these different variations. But if you tried to slam those into software development for a video game company, it wouldn't work. And it wouldn't work because if you take a design method that's tied to those models, theories, language, and metaphoric devices, and you try to insert it into an area where it's alien, it's not really built correctly for that, then we're doing design wrong. And this is a huge problem because if you are a designer and you are aware of how and why and what you design, then once realizing your design frame, you then can explore other types of design that are going on out there. And so really what we're moving towards now, I believe, and several others do in our group, is a multidisciplinary design movement. And this is going to be a very interesting space which will help break down some of those misconceptions. Because as we get more and more people into the center from different design disciplines, then the crosstalk occurs where we say, oh, well, I've always believed this about design, or I've always thought this. Well, this is my position. And so these types of discourses can lead to hybrids, developments and evolutions of different design constructs, but also potentially new theory. And so if that new design theory then inspires something completely different, that's where that amazing emergence is going to occur. And there's a lot of areas where it's all still very, very immature or not integrated yet, even closely. Areas such as quantum, cyber, space, social media, the social construction of reality, networking. These are all areas where in defense applications we need a lot of design. But on other misconceptions, some other ones that I run through, they're pretty common. I don't have time to learn design. We just need to do it. Right? That's a red flag. If you want your organization to be effective at thinking differently and thinking about itself and thinking in a new way, it's got to learn about itself. It's got to learn about thinking. And there's no way around that other than education and design facilitation and immersion. And that's going to take time. And particularly if you have something that's really, really difficult that your organization needs, there's no shortcuts. There's no hurry up and get the design done so we could do planning. Another huge misconception I run into all the time is that there's a distinction between theory and practice, right? And that the design, navel-gazing stuff, that's all up in some ivory tower, and it's just foo-foo magic throwing chicken bones, and we need to get to brass tacks and do some planning and put bullets in foreheads or do whatever the phrase may be in some of the organizations I work with. But the reality is that Russell Ackoff had a great statement as a complexity theorist. And to paraphrase him, he said, doing the wrong things right only get us more wrong, right? And so doing the wrong things right to only make us more wrong is a great way of saying we can get really good at planning and doing these things over and over and over. But if we're not linking the new theory, understanding our models, and then reevaluating whether our methods are achieving what they want, we can just keep doing the methods over and over and over and over and wasting our time. We're just really, really good at failing. Instead, the design process of disrupting and challenging the entire frame may end up having you doing something completely different with a new method, but it achieves that elusive result that you want. And so design praxis is practice with theory and continuously exchanging those with an important and necessary discourse. If you don't do that, if you're all action and no theory, you're an automaton. You're a machine, right? Because you can't correct yourself. You can only do the same stuff over and over and over, and you can't realize it because you refuse to acknowledge theory. If all you do is theory, then you can come up with great, grandiose ideas, but you have no practical application to demonstrate whether or not those theories are valuable or not. So that's bad science in both ways. And so those are some of the major misconceptions I encounter with design. I think those are the top ones off the top of my head. I would say tying it in with using design might be more relevant here. So one of the challenges for me, I think probably the biggest challenge as a design facilitator, was not learning theory and studying or being creative. I've been lucky. As a kid, I was that creative, artsy-fartsy kid. I've never had a problem with creativity. The problem I've had with being a design facilitator is patience. And patience as a facilitator is different because whether you're teaching classes or you're doing real world design work, you're doing it over and over, you're doing multiple iterations, and you might be working with different clients or on different projects or with different organizations. But after doing this for years, you'll see patterns and you'll start to see kind of above the board, as I say. And a new group may come in and you have to start from the start again. You've got to start with that basic design, or you got to start with that first icebreaker exercise, however it is you're doing it. And once you are really comfortable and proficient as a facilitator, the patience is the last piece of mastering when you see a group do something and you want to jump in and interfere, or you want to jump in and give them the right answer, or you want to accelerate their learning. And you don't give them the opportunity to make those mistakes, to realize, to experience what needs to happen. And it's going to be different for all groups. Some groups, it's just going to take longer for certain people and for certain projects. But that art of design facilitation patience for me was really one of the hardest things to learn, and one of the things that I continue to try to master every time I work on a challenge. And a lot of times it ends up being not saying anything until it's necessary, until you're needed to talk. And I'm not saying just being quiet and not saying anything. It's just listening, understanding, really appreciating what a teammate or a client or a group is saying, and then encouraging them to continue down that path of reflection, ideation, prototyping, all the things that have to be done. Because especially in military organizations, at some point they're going to say, hey, teacher, or hey, commander, or hey, consultant, tell us the right answer. And part of that is that they expect it. You've been brought in. You should know this. You need to help them get across the bridge. If you look at this as I do, and I've kind of adapted this idea, being a design Sherpa, and it's their mountain to conquer. We're just here to help them up the mountain, carry extra gear, and have the techniques to keep them safe. But they've got to learn how to conquer that challenge. And so patience really becomes this really subjective art. But when you're doing it right, you'll feel it in this intuitive way. It's not rational. So those that want to make this a science and plot out exactly how to be patient, it's not going to work. It's an art form. It's intuitive. You feel it, and as it's occurring, it feels good. And when you deviate from that, that's when I realized, I lost it. I went in there and I was too aggressive, right? I did too much. So that's one of the things that I've kind of overcome in a design context over the past 7 or so years of doing this full time. In the design context, I would say that having the ability to work with such a rich network has afforded me the opportunity to have some really great perspectives, some great experiences. And from that, I was able to do a couple things. One, I was able to get a job doing this full time, doing what I love, and doing it for an amazing organization through a great company that lets me do it's so cool to be able to work for military organizations and then engage with universities and in industry and academics, and then tap into this incredible network. And none of that would happen without having a combination of all the right things. Kind of, I got lucky, I guess, in one sense. But then eventually I was able to complete a PhD on philosophy, focused on design. And so that was a huge accomplishment for me. My father was a PhD professor. And he passed away. He's a World War II veteran, so he's a lot older. He passed away when I was in high school. And so there hasn't been a doctor's Bible since 1993. And so when I earned my doctorate on a personal level, it was just such a huge... I wore one of his ties for my final defense of my thesis. And it felt good. It felt good to say, hey, there's another Dr. Bivelson on the planet for a little bit. And that, that for me is one of the, it's a credential that you need, I suppose, to do some of the things in academia. But I wouldn't have been able to do it without the incredible network and friends and professionals that I've been working with for all these years on this kind of design journey. That's a great question. I did another interview. It was within the Joint Special Operations University, and it's on the Think JSOW website on YouTube. And they asked me a lot about COVID-19 and how we were teaching. So I'm going to make a couple of references towards that. And what happened to us was we, like most people, immediately when things started locking down in March of 2020, there was a great deal of apprehension of, well, how are we going to continue to do education if we're not allowed to go to the office and we're not allowed to travel? Now, our design team had been building a flipped classroom since 2018, which means that all of our lessons were online in a system that we recorded just like this, and flashy animation graphics, and students get to click through them. And we have tons and tons of content, which means that when the students normally would come in before COVID, they'd be coming into the classroom working with us, no lectures, no nothing. It was just design, and exercises. And then we'd let them go early in the afternoon because they would have to go home and then do those modules for the next day. And so it's a nice model called a flipped classroom. And we were lucky because we had done that before COVID hit. So when COVID hit, we said, okay, well, we have all of our lessons. They're all here online, and we can get our students, they can have access to everything. But how are we going to replicate or simulate the design work that we normally do in whiteboards in person? And so we started looking at different companies out there that offer different services. And I'm not plugging any, I don't make any money off this, but there's Mural, there's Concept Board, there's Google Hangouts with Google Whiteboard, and Jam Sessions, I believe, is another one. And then there's like 3 or 4 others. And so we picked one of those. I won't mention what it is, but it has a free version, which was what we needed anyways. And we had all of our students join in on one of these boards. And then we used a Zoom type system. And between those two, we would do sessions twice a week. And we extended our courses from a 5-day course to a 6-week course. And so what we learned were a couple things. Number one, nothing beats being on a whiteboard in person. I mean, just nothing better than that. But there are a lot of cool things that you can do in these different online boards, to include drawing and creating stuff and then tagging someone and working outside of cycle. So someone at 2:00 in the morning who's stationed in Iraq could be working on the board with a team, and then someone in San Diego gets a message at 11:00, and then they go in and they do some work. So there's out of phase, out of time work that can be done, which is really neat. The other thing that we figured out was 6 weeks was a great window for semi-autonomous learning in this distance mode, because we gave them a lot of theory, a lot of modules, a lot of reading, a lot of lessons, and over a 6-week period, the students really started to, they were absorbing it way better than in a 5-day when we're really at a sprint. Everyone, each night, they're kind of going through the material. Next day, we kind of apply it, and then by Friday, it's like, whew, we're done. In the 6-week models, in a combination of them doing their own outside research and doing the work, and then doing message board traffic inside of our system, and then doing the collaborations on these digital boards, and then meeting on the Zoom system, it was just much more powerful what the students were able to absorb and apply. And then we added a Friday strategic design sponsor engagement as well, where each week after the second week, each design team would get 20 minutes to broadcast and present to these sponsors. And then these real world, some of them are retired admirals, retired ambassadors, and incredible people, and they'll engage with them. And these people, normally I wouldn't have access to them because I would have to pay and contract them down to Tampa. And instead they're doing it voluntarily, and it's distance, and it's only an hour. So we get plenty of volunteers, which is incredible. So cumulatively, what I've found is that spreading out the course over 6 weeks is better. It's much more flexible for the students. They absorb more of the material as long as you can get it all to them. And these different boards, with combination of the distance stuff, it does help. We can get there for some of that design synthesis. That said, board work, groups working together, there's just no substitute for that. So what I think the long term will be post-COVID is modifying our courses so that we still do the 5-day flipped classroom, but I want to add like a 30-day period before that of this distance learning. I think that might be actually an even better way of really dialing it in and getting it. And the last thing I'll mention, because I know there are some actors out there that are guilty of this. You know, they entered COVID and they had a whole bunch of PowerPoint slides of their lessons that they used to present. And all they've done for this past year is use the Zoom screen share, and they've put their slides up and they're teaching the class that way. And I personally think that's no way to teach, especially with design. That's just not going to work, and it's terrible. We can't do that. It's kind of the lazy way out. And so if you're going to adapt to this new environment, this new reality that we have, you've got to put in the work and create these really thought-provoking, engaging, multidisciplinary, multimedia projects. Even if you have to do them professionally, pay the money, get them done, then get them up there and get all the different materials, so that you've got to have, if your students like podcasts, you got to have some podcasts there on, in this case, on design, and we do. If you've got some students that really just like watching YouTube videos on design, not on cat videos, you've got to have those available and accessible through YouTube, right? And then articles, books, other material, all this stuff can digitally be pushed. And then you've got to have the feedback where they are doing design with other people in some virtual setting with feedback from the facilitator, whether it's real live time or if it's distance phased, as I mentioned earlier. All those things need to happen, which it makes it harder. It makes it harder for what we're supposed to do versus teaching in a classroom, where you can get away with just showing PowerPoint slides. So I'll stop there. I know I rambled a bit. And I guess for the viewers, if they're not familiar with the Archipelago website, it's been overhauled. It's got some incredible sections that they can click on and look at all these things that I'm talking about, because a lot of what this community has done has helped compound the ability for different entities to educate. So when there's a new article or when there's a new video or when somebody gets a podcast or when somebody does a TED Talk on this, for us to be able to link it and tie it and network it and then bring it into students, that's just awesome. So that's another reason why I'm excited about the movement, is that there's so much now in 2021. I can't wait to see where we are 5 years from now.